Good. Right, good afternoon. And I think we're almost at the end of all these talks and events at the Comic Festival. I've done rather a lot of them, actually. You might be not bored with me, but you definitely will not be bored by our special guests for the next hour, Brian and Mary Talbot, who are here to talk about their work. Let me just start off by asking you please to welcome Brian and Mary Talbot. The good news, this image on the screen here is the book that they brought out last year. In fact, it was launched at the British Library at an exhibition I co-curated about British comics called Comics Unmasked, Art and Anarchy in the UK. And as you can see, it's the story of the suffragette movement. This book is going to come out in German from Egmont later in the year, I think around October, November sort of time. So do look forward to that. Here's a chance for you to hear about the book if you don't know about it already, and hear from the authors.
This is not the German cover.
No, we changed the cover down there. We have a different type?
Yes.
Sorry about that. It's called Votes for Women, Der Marsch der Suffragetten.
Aha.
Is this working?
It is, yeah. And what I'm not clear about is, was there any kind of suffragette movement or equivalent in Germany?
I'm not the person to ask
I just
about
wondered if
that.
there was. But
I believe there was, but
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you anything
there
about
was.
it.
Right. And the suffragette's story is something that I think is very important at the moment with all the issues around the world about elections and people in power and who do we vote for, and the fact that it's hard for us to believe, I think, a century ago, in Britain at least, women were thought to be totally undeserving of the vote. And the book, I think, particularly is without spoiling anything at all, it isn't just a piece of history, a very powerful piece of documentary, but it is also a message to voters today.
Well, it's a reminder to people, younger generations, of the pain and suffering and death that women went through in order to achieve the vote, and so that people hopefully will think, you know, I have to use the vote. I can't just waste it, I can't just squander it when it's been fought for at such a high cost.
Yeah, I mean, there are still quite a lot of young people.
Or to put it another way, use your vote.
Because there are quite a lot of young people who don't take part in elections at all. And even the recent one in Britain we did, but many friends of mine are quite young, younger friends, some of them. One of them managed to persuade them, vote, use it. And he did actually vote for the first time, and he was 31. You should think, all those years he never got involved. You know.
There's a shockingly low participation rate in Britain, and it's shocking how many young people particularly aren't even registered to vote, don't even know how to, if you told them to vote. Very, very just depressing.
I think another contemporary thing about the book as well, which makes it very up to date, is Sally's story. So as a working class girl who gets involved very slowly at first into the suffragette movement. As the story goes along, she gets more and more involved and more committed. And you can see that the more she's oppressed, and the more the women are oppressed in society, the more radicalised she becomes. And I think that's quite a strong message for today.
And in terms of the top of the character, Sally Heathcote, well, several people may think that she's a real person, but you explain to people that actually she's more of a representative.
Yes, I made up. I mean, she's an invented character. The history that she moves around in, however, is solidly historical. I mean, it's based on the biographies that I've read and other historical treatises that I've read on the subject. Sally herself was made up, and she was made up because I wanted somebody who could move through the different stories. I having an invented character, I wasn't stuck on, say, the biography of Emmeline Pankhurst or the life story of perhaps better known suffragettes living throughout Britain, like Hannah Mitchell, for example, who was a northern working class suffragette. They obviously were very influential in producing the story, and I got a lot of Sally's character from Hannah Mitchell, as a matter of fact. but she's male, and it was so that I could be much more fluent and mobile throughout the historical period. Also, I wanted a working class woman, because I needed someone who could help me to get across, dramatically get across what the whole point of it was. It wasn't just some whim that, oh, men have got the vote, women want it too. It was because they were disenfranchised, and it meant that they had no say in lawmaking, there was no say in the judgment of who they were being governed by, and so no influence whatsoever over things like, women's rights in terms of employment, children's rights,
Maternity leave,
that didn't exist.
Exactly. That's a modern concept. So yeah, in many ways, women are.
Childcare.
Yeah.
What childcare was that?
Yeah, it's a lesson of how much has changed. Maybe also a call to say things still could be better. Yeah. It's been a very successful book for you, and it's not the first time that two of you have collaborated. You may realise these two are related because they're husband and wife, and that this is not so unusual as it turns out to have husbands and wives in comics. I thought it was. Sorry? We've got some other images. Yeah, have we got that? We've got, should we talk about that? Or do you have more images?
No, just
from Sally.
Should we
talk about more about? Let's do Doctor.
Sorry, I thought you were going to Doctor.
We can go to Doctor. Absolutely, let's do that. Because as you may know, Brian has a long and illustrious career making graphic novels himself and collaborating with writers like Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore and many others. But it's only recently that Brian and Mary have started to collaborate. And there are other. Oh, there we go. That's some of the other projects that you've done. Exactly. Fantastic. And those are all your solo books, aren't they? In fact, we'll come back to some of those later on. Let's do that. But as we have Mary and Brian, both of you together, it's nice to look at the book that really put both of you on the map.
Brian was already on the map, I have to say.
Yeah, but not yours, a double act. Two of you together as a partnership, a creative partnership. And I'm trying to think, from my knowledge of comics, which is not that complete, but I still can't think of very many examples of the writer-artist combination that is a wife and husband in that respect. Clearly with someone like Robert Crumb and Ian Kaminsky, who were guests here 2 years ago at the Newcastle Law Room there, they both write and draw. In fact, they have done, of course, comics where they draw themselves in the same panels and do their own graphical material. And there are other examples I can think of in comics where both partners make their own comics in addition. The collaboration is still quite unusual.
I could think of examples with children's books, but
not
with comics.
It's true, it's more
the old British.
Exactly. And what about the creators of the Gruffalo? I
think so.
They might be too, yeah.
But comics,
Not for comics. So that's special. And also, and I know I'm going to labour this slightly, but I think it's very important that we have more women creating comics. And we don't have enough. Even now, we don't have enough. There should not be. There should be striving for there to be more and more parity between the number of men and women creating comics. As an industry needs women's input and women's ideas and imagination to really make it move forward.
Well, not least in terms of growing the readership, actually.
Yeah.
I think the more diverse kinds of stories you have, which are partly achieved by having a more diverse writing population, then the more diverse reading population you have as well.
Clearly expanding. Yeah. So people may not know a lot about this project, so perhaps would you like to introduce the project a bit more? Yeah.
I think we've already got this image.
Is that what we've got? Yeah, just to cover it.
Yes, Dr. McFarlane. Mary took, she's worked in academic for years and written academic textbooks and mainly around the topic of language and gender and power and gender. Language and power, stuff like this, and she's written books, standard books that are used in universities and schools. But when was it, about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, she took
2009.
She took her retirement, and one day at the dinner table I just said, hey, why don't you write a graphic novel and I'll draw it? And she went, what about? And I said, well, write about you and your dad. You know, autobiographical comics are very popular these days. And Mary had a very stormy relationship with her dad, who was an international Joycean scholar. He was one of the leading scholars of James Joyce. He wrote a bit about Joyce for the Encyclopaedia Britannica. He's written standard books on Joyce still in use today. And so half the book...
James Joyce.
Yeah, James Joyce. So half Daughter of the Father's Eyes, it's Mary's biography and the relationship with the father, and the other half is a biography of Lucia Joyce, James Joyce's daughter, and her relationship with the father, and basically contrasting two different lives of women growing up in the 20th century at different points in the 20th century, contrasting them to show how things have changed and how some things have stayed the same. But yeah, she wrote the first graphic novel. I've been doing it 40 years, you know, and she wrote the first one. It becomes the first British graphic novel to win a major literary award. You know, it won the Costa Award for biography, which I'm not complaining about, but I never won one, you know.
Is there a Costa image on there?
If I can come back to you, Mary,
No further.
because that was quite a landmark. I don't know if this has happened actually in Germany yet, but to have, this is again one of the crucial stages for comics to continue to advance and develop. It's not only to have women, but also to have recognition from all kinds of surprising places, including literary awards. And the Costa Book Awards have never recognised graphic novels before, and surprisingly in 2012 not only was Daughter of Her Father's Eyes nominated for an autobiography prize, but there was also another graphic novel nominated for the novel prize, as in the novel. And these are independent juries, they're independent critics that select from all the books that are nominated by publishers, and it is extraordinary that that happened in itself. It caused quite a furore, actually, didn't it, really? A lot of media interest, a lot of perhaps ruffled feathers amongst the literati and the sort of so-called serious authors who don't have to resort to pictures. And even more impressively, which was a fantastic achievement.
There wasn't as much negative criticism as I anticipated. I was delighted, amazed of course, but delighted by the positive response that we received. We've just been nominated, winning it was ridiculous.
And your collaborative process, people may be curious to know how a husband and wife get on when they're working together on a comic. Does it strain the relationship? I know you've had a very long and sustained relationship, shall we say, because you go way back to your teenagers.
No, there's nothing strange about it.
No.
It was just very natural doing it.
Yeah.
It seemed like an extension of every day. You know, if we're cooking the dinner together or something, you know.
You're talking about it even then.
Yes, it's the same thing, you know. But,
Right.
He means producing a graphic novel is like cooking a meal together.
Yeah, I see a collaborative thing, exactly. You
It
get
takes a bit longer.
Right, you can decide who does the peeling and who does the shopping or something. Yes.
But it was very, very, as you imagine, very close collaborations. We're both in the same house and seeing each other once an hour or something like that. And usually, as you probably know, a lot of collaborations in comics, the basically the script writer writing it, sending it to the artist, the penciler who draws it, who then sends it to the inker who inks it, and that's the end of the collaboration usually. With me and Mary, it was like almost on an hourly basis, you know, and as I was sort of acting as editor basically, so I was going through, I was making suggestions on dialogue changes, I was saying, you don't need this sentence here, you know, perhaps this could be clearer, stuff like that. And Mary, in the same way, she was saying, oh, can you draw, I don't like that, that's not working properly, can you redraw that bit? And making visual suggestions. So it was an extremely close collaboration on Daughter.
There's some quite amusing passages, aren't there, where I think little footnotes come up where you have to kind of correct sometimes things that Brian didn't get quite right. But it's quite charming that rather than correcting it, we see what Brian got wrong and you can point it out in the book, which again is a lovely touch, I think. Very Joycean.
I think you probably tell it better than I.
Yeah, for some reason I'd drawn, I mean, as I said, we were almost on an hourly basis, but for some reason Mary was away, so I had drawn 2 pages before she saw them. And it was 2 pages of a schoolroom scene. And in the description, I sort of misread it, I don't know, but Mary said, I know you said in the script the boys and girls were strictly segregated, and I have a scene with, as they used to have in schools, boys over it, girls over it, which I had at my junior school. And the thing is, I went to a Protestant junior school, and in mine, all the boys and the girls sat together. sat next to each other in desks. At Mary's, taught by nuns, whatever, all the boys on one side and all the girls on another. But on this double-page spread, I drawn them, according to my experience, I drawn them all mixed up, and Mary came back and said, that's wrong. They should be sitting on one side, boys on one side, girls on another.
You're going to have to redraw it.
And I said, I'm not redrawing it. I did it, it's good, I'm not going to redraw it. And I said, what if we put a footnote at the bottom? And you can have fun, you can sort of say, oh, Brian, you got it wrong here.
You can't do that.
I said, yeah, it'll be all right. And anyway, so she did, when we put a little footnote at the bottom of the page. And you know, all the time we were working on the book, if friends were around, your family were saying, oh, this is the book, the work in progress. They'd reach that bit and they go, oh, I like that note's really funny. And we thought, that's interesting. So we then went through the book and we put about 2 or 3 more in, because we knew that people liked these little notes. And you know, practically every review we've had of that book mentions these notes. In fact, they've even been called Joycean metatextuality, you know.
Meta-commentary, is the term.
For sure. But yeah, people like these little notes, so it came a bit by accident, maybe.
Yeah. And you come up with great, we haven't got any interior pages from Dotto.
I'm afraid not.
This is our solid talk, actually.
Okay, we should maybe show a bit more of that. Should we do that? Or?
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Right. But because Brian, you adapt for each project, you adapt your drawing style. So you come up with both Dotto and for Sally Heathcote with different stylistic approaches that were suited to them.
Well, you see, the thing is, when Mary signed a contract for Sally, I'd already signed a contract and had been working on for several months the 4th Granville book,
Which we'll talk about in a little bit.
which came out in November. So I said, well, I've not got time to do both. I won't be able to fit both books, it would be possible. And I said to them, we'll find somebody else to draw it. And we were thinking about various people. Very early on, Kate Charlesworth, who we saw before. I thought of Kate very early on, who I've known for quite a while, and she's done lots of strips for like The Guardian, New Scientist, The Pink Paper, and all sorts of things. And I thought it's quite important that the finished artwork, I think, be done by a woman who's about suffragettes.
Absolutely. And also, I think Kate's one of those great comic artists that hasn't actually, she's done a lot of work,
Yeah.
but not all of it's necessarily risen to the surface, she would say, for lots of attention.
No.
She's working on her own project and she's focused on something personal.
Oh yeah.
So this was a great step for her to work with you on a big project.
It was, she said how grateful she was. I mean, she really enjoyed working on it as well. But you can see Kate's style here. Her usual style, it's very cartoony, as you can see, and very chaotic sort of layouts and things. And I thought this won't really suit Sally Heathcote, won't suit this Edwardian story, which has to be quite formal really, to get across the feeling of the times. And I was looking online and I came across this illustration she'd done of Virginia Woolf. And I thought, well, that's ideal, that style's great. As it turned out, she used a different style for Sally, but it was one that was even more suitable, as it turned out. So what I did, if I can find them, is I said, okay, because I didn't want Sally to be laid out like this, and lettering to be like this, I didn't think it was suitable.
No, they're quite complicated layouts, aren't they, like that?
Well,
yes.
so what I said was that I'll do the sort of rough layouts and the rough visual storytelling, if you like, and the lettering. So you can see here, that's my layouts on the left, and that's Kate's finished artwork on the right. And of course, I didn't have to do all the I mean, I did actually quite a lot of research. We all three of us did research, but I just needed to draw some generic costume and just a few lines for her, and Kate would then give it a proper Edwardian hairdo, etc. You can see I indicated, where the eye level should be a lot of the time, the light source, position of the light source, and you can see Kate followed the layout. It's extremely faithful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Kate enjoyed this. I think she said that she quite liked being given this template to work with.
Yeah, but she said at first it was a bit strange, and she said, "Oh, I like somebody telling me what to do all the time." And then she told me that she suddenly realised that it actually freed her from a lot of the work, and she just had to sit there and draw it. She said she really enjoyed this experience.
Yeah, the artwork took her about 11 months. She reckon it would take her 2 years if she had to do the layouts as well.
Because it's about 150 pages.
160.
Yeah.
Something
It's
artwork
substantial
pages,
novel, isn't it? Yeah. And what about the
So I sort of did them in batches of 10 and emailed her the files. I did them straight on the computer with a Wacom tablet. I did the frames with a line tool, stuff like that. And then she'd email me and say, "Oh, I'm running out of roughs, can you send me the next batch?" So I'd stop what I was doing on Granville and spend about 2 or 3 days doing the next batch. But it still took, even though I was doing the roughs, it still took about 4 hours a day.
Well, there's a lot of thinking and conceptualizations into coming up with those layouts. That's absolutely the underpinning of the whole story, isn't it? And Brian, you've been one of the masters of sort of a clear graphic storytelling. It's always been one of your great strengths, and it's getting stronger all the time with your work. But it's lovely to see the transition from one the rough to finished. Yeah.
This is one of my favourite pages actually. I have the original artwork of this one on the wall.
And what you'll notice on the finished artwork is that there's just a very minimal use of colour. In this case, of course, Sally's red hair, which becomes a motif that enables you to immediately see where she is on the page, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Use a good device.
Well, very early on, I think it was about 10 pages in, I suddenly realised that here we have a cast of dozens of women, all in Edwardian costume, all in Edwardian hairdos. I thought it's important, you know where Sally is. You can recognise Sally when you see her. And I said to her, let's give her red hair. And I said this to Kate. Kate then went back and sort of gave her red hair in the earlier one she'd drawn. And then spontaneously, Kate started colouring Emily Pankhurst's, leader of the WSPU, her dress purple. Or lilac.
One of the subjects.
Yeah, because that was our original idea, to keep it monochrome, to keep it sort of Edwardian photograph feeling. But just use the WSPU colours, which were purple, white and green. And the first deviation was me saying, let's make Sally's hair red. And Kate then made Mrs. Pankhurst sort of in lilac every time, so she was recognisable every time. And Emmeline Pettit-Lawrence, she gave her brown hair, so she was recognisable every time without even the distance. It works really well. It's what we call the Rupert Bear effect.
Yes, you can't miss Rupert the Bear.
You can't miss Rupert the Bear. You recognise his distinctive colours no matter where he is. And there's one scene, I don't know if we've got it in here, but it's Emily Wilding Davison's funeral. And there's thousands of people in this scene. It's an aerial shot, and you can see Sally. You can see Sally in the procession because of her red.
Yeah. The story goes around a little bit into it is that the artist drawing Rupert the Bear could never show a cow without Rupert the Bear in it.
Yeah,
It's a very interesting constraint for anyone to actually write a story. So at one point, Rupert the Bear is imprisoned in a castle, and something else has to happen when he's not involved. But they still drew, like you were saying, Harry, Rupert looking out of the bars of the castle prison in the far distance, so that the children wouldn't lose touch.
This is how I said this a lot during talks and talking about colour. I think it opened a Rupert advert, any page, point by panel with Rupert in it.
I don't know whether Rupert the Bear is.
You don't know Rupert the Bear, but it's a classic children's comic, and he wears bright yellow check trousers and
Red jumper.
so you can always see, and he's a bear, so he does stand out rather. Yes, good.
Yeah, so sometimes I actually in Photoshop put posters on the wall, actual suffragette posters and actual posters at the time, and then when Kate was doing the artwork, she'd redraw the posters.
You must, I mean, that's obviously partly also one of your reference material. Both
Yes.
Mary, were you looking up photographic
I
records,
think I
obviously
probably
movie
provided
records?
most
and
of
things?
those actually.
Yeah.
We were all visiting.
We were all doing research,
And
and we were all
looking at archives and things of material, because we're talking about relatively modern times, a century ago there would have been more material in terms of photographs and film and things.
we were very careful to get right posters at the right times. It goes through several years, this. And for example, in this scene now, I don't know if you can see in the middle panel in the background, it's a poster for Houdini. This is in Newcastle. And you can see that poster for Houdini. And this is the poster that he played Newcastle. Houdini, and that's coming out of the posters when he was in Newcastle. So we paid a lot of attention to that. Yeah. In fact, this you can see the photograph of the car that meets Lord George when he arrives at Newcastle Station there. That was actually the car he was collecting. It's all very well
It's
researched.
actually much very you come from as Brian mentioned from an academic background. You must have been slightly nervous that, or at least conscious of that you would that the historians and the critics, the experts
Absolutely.
on this would be looking out for every possible.
And in fact,
Tiny
I
error.
did a presentation at an academic conference about suffragettes just after the publication of the book, and it was the audience was full of kind of women's history specialists, people writing new biographies of the Pankhursts and so on. So I was a little bit nervous. And in fact, one of them, I forget the name, but she'll be getting another new Pankhurst biography out shortly. She did grill me quite
You see, it's not
rigorously.
Mrs. Pankhurst, although she's leading the suffragettes, in our book, she doesn't have a favourable image. I mean, we don't paint a nice picture of her. Because she was a bit of a dictator, you know.
Yeah, and she did. She put me through my paces about it, but I think I must have passed the test because she then went on to buy was it 2 copies.
She bought 2 copies, yes.
So it must have been alright.
Right. And there's all, this is what you were saying, that the history is always being rethought or rewritten, it's not fixed. And for most people, Emily Pankhurst, she was the only suffragette we know.
Well, I wanted to draw attention to figures, lesser known figures, not lesser figures, because there are people involved who are very central indeed to the movement, but who've been overshadowed by this famous family of the Pankhursts. But I did a massive amount of research. I was using exactly the same kind of skills which I've developed writing academic textbooks and conference papers and this sort of thing, all rigorously referenced. And there are about 20 pages of endnotes in this book as well, and sources.
And to give the story a dramatic shape, you had to probably also figure out where we would end the story, because as you practically explained, the actual eventual arrival of votes for women, of their enfranchisement, took a bit longer still than your story was able to go.
Yes, well, I had a fictional character who had her own agenda, basically, and she has a love affair throughout the course of this book, and I had to keep the story going strong, and I think to have gone to the bitter end would have taken another 15 years, and it would have started to flag a little bit. Plus, I mean, the First World War got in the way as well, and that wasn't something I could just sort of brush aside, whiz by, and because it was completely earth-shattering.
But you then have the additional narrative technique of having an opening and closing narrative narrator story, which does give you a very powerful ending to the story. It brings it up to date.
And of course I had the end notes that I could fill in.
Exactly, the appendices.
Because in Britain, some women got the vote in 1918 at the end of the First World War. But the battle had to go on until there was a full franchise. And that wasn't until 1928. It would have been a very long drawn-out story, and it would have been a bit difficult to keep the kind of human element that I've produced going for that long with the First World War in the way and all.
Now, I know you are working on something new which is going to be revealed at the Lakes Comic Art Festival in Kendal in October, but without telling us too much, can you tell us just where you are with it and yet something about it? We know that you're going to work together. Brian, you will do all the artwork for this one, will you?
Yes, I've got about 20 pages to go.
You mentioned and you fit that in between this and the next Granville.
Yes, I finished Granville and I've done it since then. So.
Right, so when you say finished Granville, this is the big one, the fifth.
The one I'm going to start when I finish.
That's the next one you start?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, 160 page one.
That's the big one, right. So we have to really wait until next for the preview of what we're on to next, but then looking forward to seeing what you do
But it's
together.
completely different, isn't it? Don't expect a sequel or anything like that.
It's still about a strong woman character in history, you know. But she's so amazing, and not many people have heard of her. We would just frightened if we announced who it was. Somebody would look it up and go, my God, this was an incredible woman. I'll get a graphic novel like first.
Yes, so best to keep it to your chest for the moment.
Yeah.
Good. Shall we transition to Granville? I think because Granville is also, of course, widely available and is available here in Germany.
Maybe change the...
Do we need to fiddle around with the...
Yeah.
Is that okay? We'll do that?
Yeah.
How many people here in the audience, German people, have read any of Granville? Have you read Granville? So, good, that's great. Have you enjoyed it? Yeah. For those who haven't, it is one of the most clever anthropomorphic, i.e. funny animal comics you can find at the moment. And what's also interesting about Granville is it is not just simply a serialized story of episodes with the badger detective and his ratty companion. It is building, as Brian said, towards a really big 160-page climax, certainly sort of completion of a story arc, which I think is going to be a landmark book when that comes out. It will perhaps change people's perceptions, certainly change, I know it's going to change mine, because as much as I've loved and enjoyed Granville, I realise that seething through it is a much bigger theme. As you may know, Granville involves humanised animals of various kinds, representing different personalities and characters, but they're human beings like us also appear in this world. And there's going to be various issues of prejudice and
I sort of, to a lot of extent, I dealt with those in the fourth one, Granville Noel. They sort of came to a head in that issue.
Sure.
But yeah, there's, as well as animals, as you can see, he is Detective Inspector LeBrock himself, the protagonist, basically because you can't go wrong with a badger with guns. And making a story out, you know, it's a winning formula. Here it is again. Although the world is populated by animals, there are some human beings in it, only in the story, they're second-class citizens. They have no civil rights. And, the presidents call them dough faces, it's a derogatory term for them. And a lot of the story of the first 3 or 4, in the background of the first 3 or 4 Granville books, has been this, them protesting for civil rights and demanding civil rights. About the end of the 4th book, you know, it's in the air, it's obvious that they're going to get them. Mainly because the 4th one, by the end of the 4th one, there's a fascist party risen to power, it's trying to get power, and they're getting power by blaming everything on the humans, you know, making them the sort of scapegoat. Very strong connection with the Nazis.
I mean, echoes even today of xenophobia and
Well, yeah,
issues
I
of immigrants and stuff, which is
in the UK, you know, you can't pick up a newspaper without saying, you know, immigrants are ruining society and blaming all of society's ills on immigrants. So it's, yeah.
And Granville, as a concept, I know your big inspiration was the French artist Granville.
Yes, which I don't have any.
But just tell me how that spark led to this whole steampunk Paris.
Yeah, I don't know how many people have heard of the artist Jean-Ignace Isidore Gérard. He's an early 19th century French artist who used to sign himself J.J. Granville. That was his pen name. Anybody know his work? If you do a search, a Google image search for J.J. Granville, you'll find tons of his stuff. And he used to do a lot of these anthropomorphic illustrations.
A lot of the time he was kind of satirising society, wasn't he?
That's
showing you know, people look like a frog or a fox or something.
Yeah, he was.
He's one of the first anthropomorphic cartoonists, I think. Certainly one of the pioneers, or
yeah. I mean, they've been around since cave paintings,
yeah,
but
to go back a long way.
medieval, Rain out the Fox and
Yeah.
things like
So
this.
essentially, Grandville means big town, doesn't it? Essentially?
Yeah, which is where I got the idea. I was looking at a book I'd had for years of his work, and it suddenly occurred to me that Granville could be the name, a nickname for Paris in an alternative reality, populated by animals, where it's the largest city in the world. And I thought, well, how could that be? And I thought, well, obviously, France won the Napoleonic Wars, and it won the Napoleonic Wars. Executed all the heads of state, all the kings and queens of the other countries, and up till a period about 23 years before the start of the first Granville book, Britain's been part of the French Empire, and it was begrudgingly given independence about 20 years ago after a sustained campaign of civil unrest and anarchist bombings. So now it's like this little unimportant country across the channel from France called the Socialist Republic of Britain. That's the setting of the stories. But yeah, every story takes Le Broc to Paris. So the Granville is the name.
Yeah, and Granville being a Badger, he has a sort of number two, a kind of Holmes to Watson partnership with a rat character.
Yeah, with Roderick Rats in. I don't know if you can see it. I mean, one of the other inspirations for this, of course, is Wind in the Willows, because the
Exactly.
Badger was he's the most capable character in Wind in the Willows. And to some extent, his sidekick is based on Ratty from
Right.
Wind in the Willows. He's also based on Don Ailsey's Lord Peter Wimsey and
His butler.
P.G. Woodhouse.
Woodhouse, of course.
Bertie Wooster.
But he was,
Exactly. He was a monitor and everything. I thought I've got a picture of him, actually.
Right.
We should look at the special time.
And of course, this is not
There you can see Roderick in the bottom corner there.
And this is a steampunk storyline.
This is
where
the
you've got
cross-channel
the cross-channel connection, yes, to Paris.
But yeah, it's a steampunk story there.
So you're able to then also enjoy that sort of the mad possibility of what if technology should advance in the Victorian era.
It's a steampunk version of that epoch, Paris, a lot of it.
Yeah.
And we actually mentioned Rupert the Bear before. Well, Rupert the Bear, in the stories, he comes from a village called Nutwood.
Yes.
And in Granville, near the beginning, there's been a murder in Nutwood. And throughout the stories, I do have a lot of references to other sort of anthropomorphic characters, there's references to Tintin and
Have you got that page on hand? It's fantastic. It's one of the best pages from the first one of Granville, wasn't it? Granville was where Snowy, or Milo, the Tintin's little white terrier dog, appears in a very surprising situation.
No, I'm afraid
Not to worry, it's one of
he's
the unusual cameos you came up with.
in Granville. Snowy is he's only in for about two pages or so, but he's a suspect that Le Broc goes to question. And he's in an opium den. He's one of the addicts in an opium den, which actually based on a Gustave Doré illustration from the 19th century. But when he tries to question him, he keeps drifting off into his opium dreams, and he's saying, "Oh yes, I was walking on the moon with the dough face." And, "Yeah, no, we were in the Congo, weren't we? It was very hot." And, his dream was basically the Tintin adventures.
Which is in Tintin stories.
Yeah. That was it's the cover of the second one, Robert Monroe. The first one was a murder mystery, conspiracy theory story. The second one was a serial killer story. And it's about the effects of terrorism, the dehumanising effects of terrorism, which is use animals, to illustrate the dehumanising effects.
And when you this I noticed this world seemed to suddenly came to you in quite a rush, didn't it? You suddenly had a rush of inspiration. And did you describe that? And what
It's usually I spend sometimes years thinking about these graphic novels. I have a folder at home with the ideas for a graphic novel I've been thinking about for about 20 years, and it's still not, it's still not coalesced really. But with the Granville book, as I said, I was looking at this book on Granville, on Jean-Ignace Girard, and I suddenly thought, what if Granville was going to leave for Paris. And I'd wanted to do a detective story for some while. I didn't have a specific one in mind, but I like detective fiction. And I thought, well, I'll do a detective story with animals. And I thought about it. I was working on something else, working at Alice probably. And I thought about it. No, it was actually Metronome. I was doing Metronome. Thought about it for about a week. And after a week, I just sat down and I wrote a basic structure, story structure, after thinking about it for a week. Sat at the word processor and I typed it all out in about 5 or 6 days. Just all the script, the entire graphic novel. It was like taking dictation. You know, it was I could hear the voices, I knew what was going to happen next, I could see them moving about, I could hear them speaking. I knew the characters.
It's a very rare thing, isn't
It
it?
hasn't happened since.
Yeah.
I've done several books since that, and I noticed how that might happen.
Yeah.
Also, Granville was the first book, because always designing a graphic novel is a very long thing, and one of the things I used to go through was to do detailed roughs of each page, thumbnails, and develop the text and the illustration at the same time. For the first time with Granville, I actually skipped that stage completely. Went straight from the structure to the script, because I found I could just do it in my head. And anything that saves time in a graphic novel is a good thing. So now I skip the rough stage completely and just do it in my mind as I go along with the typing. I've done it ever since.
This is not so surprising, Brian, because you've been working on comics for most of your life. So it actually would seem to be the natural step to become a natural, to be able to do it instinctually like this, straight go from the script to page.
But very often doing these, writing Granville, I find the characters, because I know them. I'll be doing a scene and I have a list of things that I know what's happening in the scene. An example is in the third one, there's quite a long dinner party scene. And I knew there were several bits of information I had to get across at this dinner party, there were several things that had to happen. And as I'm writing it, I have LeBrock, who's a working class badger, it's posh dinner, and he's getting everything wrong, he doesn't know which knife to use, he tucks his napkin into his shirt, and at one point the soup arrives, and he had a sip of the soup, and it's gazpacho, and he spits it out, and
Because it's cold.
yeah, and he says, God, that soup's as cold as a penguin's arse. No, I didn't expect that, it was only when I got to that bit, he just came out with it, LeBrock. It just sort of appeared as I was typing. That soup's as cold as a penguin's arse. And then during this dinner party, him and a female character sort of spontaneously, as I'm writing the dialogue, they started flirting with each other. And she's sort of playing footsie with him under the table and all this other stuff. And I hadn't expected, when I sat down to write that scene, I didn't think that was going to happen.
No.
So yeah, sometimes it just like comes alive as you write and it takes over.
It's a wonderful experience. We know we've got your big 160-page one is lying ahead of you. And is that a sort of the closing of a sort of a story arc or a suite of books?
Yeah.
Or do you have any more? Do you plan to do more, Brandon?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
No. Right.
Partly because partly it takes so long.
Yeah.
I mean, these pages, they take about 4 days to do. The Dot of the Father's Eyes, I found I could do sometimes 2 pages a day.
Because they're smaller.
One is smaller, simpler style,
Yeah.
1 page a day. But
a much looser style.
much looser style.
Yeah.
This is it's like doing full. I do some of the artwork on the drawing board, that's things in Scandinavia. I do all the colours digitally, and it just takes a long time. The other reason is that I'm just about to sign an option for a Granville TV series. Right, which, well, if it gets made, I don't know. It's used in films, they've got completely making things for ages. We've got Steve Pendleton, the writer, interested in writing it. We've got the production designer, I think, who did the Sherlock Holmes, the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes films. So they're talking about doing it live action in CGI. And the thing is, if they buy the rights for a series, it means if you do any further ones in that series, they also own the rights to them. No extra money. So if I have any more ideas for Granville stories, I'll change them slightly a bit and call it something else.
Right. But they bought the rights to these up to all 5 albums.
Yeah.
Including the ones that we done. Yeah.
That's right.
This would be a TV series?
Yeah.
Serial. Yeah.
TV series. based on the novels, but with other stories in between, bit by.
Ah, so extra stories get cropped in.
Yeah.
And how involved will you be in that?
Oh, well, I do, in the contract, there's a consultancy fee, and you want to highlight commitment from me.
Right.
So they do want to keep it very close to the comics.
So, for example, would you be designing new characters for the new stories, new material?
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah,
Probably
yeah.
not. I mean, there are new characters in the fifth one.
Right, right, right.
But yeah, they won't be involved in it.
Great.
So there's a consultancy fee built in.
Yeah, yeah, okay. I understand. Yes.
Which is actually on top of the option.
Ah, nice. Very good. I think you've opened it out to the audience, but I haven't out to the public. And the audience may be also familiar with a great deal else of your career, Brian. And I would also urge you to check out Suffragette, for All Votes for Women, and that subtitle I can't remember in German.
Der Marsch der Suffragetten.
Ah, the March, as in power.
Marsch.
March.
Probably not pronouncing
Is
it
it
correctly.
any
March, it's March of the Suffragettes.
Yes, March of Suffragettes. Oh yes, which comes out in the autumn. But do we have some questions from the audience for Brian or for Mary? Would you like to ask anything of them? Otherwise, we've got enough here for about another 5 hours because, as you know, Brian's got an enormous back catalogue of great work. And a lot of it, luckily, has been brought back into print. I mean, Brian's first major epic was Neither Arkwright. That's been reprinted with Heart of Empire, which was like volume 2 with Arkwright in a huge integral volume. Is that available in German? I think Arkwright's
I don't think there's ever been a German edition.
Of Arkwright?
No, there's been Finnish edition, Spanish, Italian, French.
That surprises me. Yeah.
I don't think there's ever been a German edition of Arkwright.
Right, okay. Another book that, two books you might come across is The Tale of One Bad Rat, which was...
Which has been published in German.
That's in the book.
I've got copies in there. It was published about 15 years ago in German.
Yeah, exactly. This takes Beatrice Potter's world and mixes it with the subject of runaways, kids that run away from home, and in this case due to parental abuse.
Yeah,
It's
it's about psychological
combination.
after effects of child sexual abuse.
Tremendous book, I think. And the other book that really brought you fame, and especially working for Jonathan Cape, the British publisher, was Alice in Sunderland. Maybe as we're in the anniversary year this year, it's 150 years since Lewis Carroll wrote the first version of Alice in Wonderland. Maybe we could see something from that.
That's the cover.
Mm-hmm. Has there been any application about Alice in Sunderland into other forms? Has that been adapted in any way?
I've had a couple of people interested in doing theatrical versions.
Yeah, it is a performance itself, isn't it, on the page?
But nothing's ever come of it. But at the moment, there's a composer, Gary Lloyd, who's worked with Ian Banks and Alan Moore. He's put their stuff to music. He and his partner, Bettina Carpi, who's a dancer and choreographer,
Who's Swiss.
modern dancer. They're currently doing a music and dance, modern dance adaptation of Dr. Profound's House.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Because of course what she enjoys is that dance comes into that. She wants to be a dancer.
She was a very talented dancer.
Yeah, that's a wonderful combination. So Alice in Sunderland actually, as it suggests, in fact last weekend we were all up in Sunderland. There was the first ever UK Graphic Novel Expo in Sunderland, which is in the north of England. And this year there's the anniversary of Alice in Sunderland. There's a big show coming on at the Cartoon Museum, the British Library, all around this. And this book was a landmark because it really was the first effort to fully put across how much Lewis Carroll owed to Sunderland and the region.
Exactly. I'm very convinced that a lot of Alice came out of the North East. In fact, he wrote several parts of Alice in Sunderland, including Jabberwocky, which he wrote at a family party. His cousins who lived in Sunderland. It was a family party, verse making. The game was there to make a verse section. He came up with the most famous nonsense poem in the English language. And again, in Alice, I had a little adaptation, a commentary adaptation. Trying to do it in the style of Tendall, who did the original illustrations.
And again, it's an example of your use of multiple styles and metatextual ideas. Very Joycean in some way, I suppose, to bring it back to Potter. But it was a tour de force, also very large scale, many pages, very graphically inventive, using all kinds of collage processes and Photoshop techniques to really create a rich experience.
Well, the thing is, it came down to her as I was doing the book, it was about stories, so it's a book about stories and storytelling. And I'm telling the myths of, I'm telling different things, including the myths of Sunderland and the history of Sunderland. So I use different styles. I mean, for example, at one point, I do the speech before Harfleur from Henry IV in the style of Mad Magazine in the 60s. So I do the speech, but each line is illustrated completely literally, which makes it completely hilarious, I think. If you take each line and imagine it would look like literally. The next line is, or fill up the wall with our English dead, sort of guy, English dead. Mortar, building a wall later. That was an idea I got at grammar school. I was 14 in the 60s, I've had it in my mind ever since.
Saving it for something.
Yeah. I used it 40 years later.
But this shows, I think, the versatility of not just you as a creative writer, but the leadership now of comics is that we've got this arsenal of different styles and references, and we no longer necessarily expect a comic to be all in one set way. It's a much more fluid approach to
this is the story of Jack Crawford, who's a Sunderland hero. He's the guy who he changed the course of the war with the Dutch, basically by, I don't know if you've ever heard the English phrase to nail your colours to the mast, which means to state what you believe in. It actually comes from the actions of this guy, who was an ordinary sailor. During the battle, the mast got shot down with a cannon, the Admiral's colours hit the floor, and he actually picked up the Admiral's, which was actually a signal to the rest of the fleet to surrender. He actually picked the flag up, climbed up the flagpole and nailed it back. He was being shot at, his cheek was nicked with musket fire and everything. And he became a huge hero, a massive national known hero. And his story reads like a boy's own adventure story. So I illustrated it in like a 1940s British boy's own adventure comic style. Yeah, the Cold Blood of Hilton, which is a ghost story. I thought that obviously has to be in an EC Comics parody, including with the story horse and everything. So yeah, it was a fun playground and stuff like this.
And you yourself,
this is what other sequence.
Oh yes, this is Tintin graphics.
It reminded me of Tintin, it being in Morocco. So.
And you appear as both a narrator, but also as the audience, about your own audience. Throughout the book.
Which enables me to take the piss out of myself as the presenter.
Yeah, that's good. I hope it does deserve to be adapted to the stage. It'd be quite a complex thing, perhaps with projection you could achieve that. So I think we probably have a little time left. Does anyone have a burning question they'd like to ask to Brian and Mary this afternoon? I'm opening up to the floor if you'd like to. Go
I'm
ahead.
just going to ask this question.
Oh yes.
What do you collect? Do you collect any little artifacts? Do you collect books or things like that? I know you do a lot of research when you're creating your graphic novels. Do you collect things that are informative?
I don't deliberately collect things, I accumulate things. I mean, how many bookcases have we got in the house? I don't know. We've not been overflowing. I have piles of them on my studio floor waiting to rent.
We try not to collect things.
We're trying not to.
But we're not very successful.
I've got a living room full of masks. Masks from different places. Venice Film Festival, Venice Festival masks, or African masks, or whatever.
But that isn't a request to send us any more.
No. I have things like, I've actually just bought a model replica Colt 45 Navy, a Colt Navy, one of the old drugs. That's reference really for Granville. I'm going to use it in the next boat because it's very heavy. You draw these things, you imagine what they look like in around. So I've got this so I can see what it's like from every angle. I mean, I've got a collection of hats. I've got fez, a pith helmet, a policeman's helmet, mortarboard, school teachers,
These things that you've got
top hats.
These things you've got on yourself to draw the characters.
To wear the hat, sorry.
We've got an ARP helmet.
But yeah, an ARP helmets,
Very nice
a
top
Russian communist officer's hats. I've got a collection of hats. I just accumulated these things. Like I said, I didn't set out to collect things, but I just accumulate these.
Visual references.
Yeah, I use them. A lot of them as visual references. I've got little statues of knickknacks in the studio, which sometimes I use for drawing profiles. I've got a big collection of animal toys. that I use for Granville. You can straight and get the angle on the heads and draw from that.
And one of them come around sort of full circle, because there are now three-dimensional figures of the Granville.
Oh yeah, there are little metal figures of the Granville characters. They're a role-playing game company. They make Ocelot Games. They make these really cute little lead figures from Granville. And they're actually in the process of writing a Granville role-playing game at the moment. In fact, in October, I think, there's a brand new Uthraga role-playing game comes out in Canada.
That's going to be well too. Tremendous. Thank you very much. Well, we will keep our eyes open for what your new project is together. I know you're keeping it close to us, but it's going to be well worth checking out. Do check out if you're the German edition of Sally Heath's subjects coming out from Egmont. And please thank Brian and Mary Talbot for a fascinating hour. Thank you very much for joining us.